Federal agents just raided the United Nations in Manhattan, 80 investigators inside.
This morning, we executed federal search warrants at UN headquarters. Evidence of coordination with domestic entities.
Documents reveal UN officials coordinated with American political operatives for years. $67 million traced.
I need FBI files, 4:47 a.m., January 6, 2026, Manhattan, New York. The streets around the United Nations headquarters were empty. Security lights reflected off wet pavement. A light fog rolled in from the East River, but federal agents were already inside. FBI, Department of Homeland Security, Treasury agents, over 80 federal investigators executing coordinated search warrants across UN offices. No press, no cameras, just sealed court orders and encrypted communication channels. The target wasn't a rogue nation. It wasn't a terrorist cell. It was the United Nations itself. Documents seized that morning would expose coordination between UN officials and political operatives across 5 continents. Plans to influence American policy. Strategies to undermine national sovereignty. Networks designed to bypass democratic processes. If you want the full truth about what they found, hit like so. This story reaches more people. The investigation began quietly. June 14, 2025. A Treasury Department analyst flagged unusual financial patterns. Money flowing through UN-affiliated NGOs, grants labeled as humanitarian aid. But the destinations didn't match. Not refugee camps, not disaster zones, political organizations, activist networks, media operations, all inside the United States. The amounts were staggering. $43.7 million moved between January 2021 and May 2025. Payments disguised as development grants, democracy initiatives, climate programs. But the money didn't fund wells or solar panels. It funded influence. The analyst sent the report up the chain. Treasury investigators opened a file. They traced accounts, followed wire transfers, documented recipients. Every trail led back to the same source: UN Development Program, UN Human Rights Council, UN Office for Partnerships, legitimate agencies, respected institutions. But the money told a different story. By July 2025, Treasury brought in the FBI. Financial crimes were one thing. But if foreign entities were coordinating domestic political activity, that crossed into counterintelligence. Agents began surveillance. They monitored communications, tracked meetings, documented contacts between UN officials and American political operatives. What they discovered wasn't random. It was systematic. Weekly meetings at Manhattan offices, conference calls across time zones, encrypted messaging platforms, shared documents outlining strategies to reshape American policy and counter nationalist movements. The language wasn't diplomatic, it was operational. One document titled Post-2024 Strategy Framework detailed plans to maintain progressive momentum despite electoral setbacks. It identified conservative media as primary obstacles and outlined tactics to delegitimize populist narratives. This wasn't policy analysis, it was political warfare. Agents dug deeper. They found more documents, more communications, more money. The scope was breathtaking. Comment exposed if you believe this needs investigation. The operation had a name. Agents found it buried in internal communications. Global Resilience Initiative. On paper, it was a UN program promoting democratic values and human rights. Noble goals, humanitarian mission. Funded by member nations, supported by international coalitions. But the reality was different. The initiative coordinated with activist organizations across the United States, environmental groups, immigration advocacy networks, social justice coalitions, all receiving funding, all following similar messaging, all targeting the same political objectives. Agents identified 37 American organizations receiving money through the initiative. Combined funding exceeded $31 million between 2021 and 2025. The money came with conditions, not written contracts, not formal agreements, expectations, communicated through back channels, coordinated through UN liaisons, enforced through continued funding. Organizations receiving money amplified specific narratives: climate crisis urgency, border policy liberalization, election reform demands, wealth redistribution, all aligned with UN policy positions, all timed to influence American political cycles. The coordination wasn't coincidental. Internal emails showed UN officials scheduling impact campaigns around congressional hearings, planning media pushes before state legislative sessions, coordinating messaging ahead of federal court decisions. One email from August 2024 was particularly damning. A UN official wrote to a coalition of American NGOs, critical that messaging remains consistent through November. resources allocated, media partnerships confirmed, legal support standing by for post-election challenges. Post-election challenges, planned in advance, funded internationally, coordinated by UN officials. Federal investigators saw a pattern: foreign interference, not through military force, not through cyber attacks, through bureaucratic manipulation and financial influence. By September 2025, FBI had enough for surveillance warrants. Federal judges approved monitoring of UN communications, email accounts, phone lines, internal servers. Agents watched information flow between New York and capitals worldwide. What they found shocked even seasoned counterintelligence officers. The UN wasn't just influencing American policy, it was building parallel governance structures. Let me show you how deep this goes. Agents discovered planning documents for international oversight committees designed to monitor American compliance with UN resolutions. Not treaties ratified by Congress, not agreements approved by the Senate, resolutions, declarations, non-binding frameworks that UN officials treated as enforceable law. One proposal outlined verification mechanisms for American immigration policy. UN observers would access detention facilities, review enforcement procedures, report findings to international bodies, all without congressional authorization. Another document detailed climate accountability measures. International monitors would audit American energy production, review corporate emissions, recommend sanctions against non-compliant states. Bypassing federal authority entirely, these weren't hypothetical proposals, they were operational plans. Documents included budgets, staffing requirements, timeline projections, implementation strategies waiting for political windows to open. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but the intent was clear: circumvent American sovereignty, replace democratic processes with international oversight, transfer authority from elected officials to unaccountable bureaucrats. Agents found communications discussing resistance governors who would cooperate with UN initiatives regardless of federal policy. State officials willing to implement international frameworks without congressional approval. 17 governors were mentioned by name. Communication records showed meetings, conference calls, coordination sessions. Some officials denied involvement. Others claimed routine diplomatic engagement. But the documents told a different story. Planning sessions for sanctuary jurisdictions that would ignore federal immigration enforcement. Strategies to implement UN environmental standards through state regulations. Coordination with international legal teams to challenge federal policies in American courts. This wasn't diplomacy. It was subversion. Type yes if you want to see what happened next. The financial networks were equally troubling. Agents traced money through layers of organizations. UN funds went to international NGOs. Those NGOs granted money to American foundations. Foundations funded activist groups. Activist groups paid for media campaigns, legal challenges, and political organizing. The laundering was sophisticated. A $5 million UN grant to a Geneva-based development organization became $4.2 million to a New York foundation became $3.8 million distributed across 12 American advocacy groups. Each transaction documented as legitimate charitable giving, each step removed from the original source. But the coordination remained. Messaging points distributed from UN communications offices appeared in American media within 48 hours. Legal strategies discussed in Geneva appeared in American courtrooms within weeks. Policy proposals drafted in New York appeared in state legislatures within months. The influence was systematic, organized, funded. Treasury agents identified $67.4 million moved through these networks between 2021 and 2025. Not all originated with the UN. Some came from foreign governments, others from international foundations, but all coordinated through UN-affiliated organizations. The money funded more than activism. Agents discovered payments to American media figures, not bribes, not direct payments, consulting fees, speaking honorariums, research grants, all legal, all documented, all designed to influence coverage. Journalists received $15,000 to $50,000 for advisory roles with UN-affiliated organizations. Their subsequent reporting amplified UN positions. Coincidence or coordination? The timing suggested the latter. Academic institutions received grants for research initiatives that produced studies supporting UN policy frameworks. Universities got funding. Professors got publications. UN officials got academic credibility for political agendas. The corruption wasn't crude. It was refined, institutional, deniable. But federal investigators saw the pattern. Share this so more people understand what's happening. The operation intensified after January 2025. Following political changes in Washington, UN officials accelerated their activities. Internal communications showed urgency. Concern about losing influence channels, determination to maintain momentum through alternative networks. One March 2025 memo was explicit. Federal cooperation diminished. State and local partnerships now critical. Increase funding to resilient jurisdictions. Expand media outreach. Prepare legal challenges to nationalist policies. The UN was preparing for confrontation with the American government. Agents documented meetings between UN officials and leaders of the political opposition. Strategy sessions, coordination calls, resource allocation discussions, not diplomatic engagement, political organizing. Constitutional law experts consulted by the FBI were blunt. If foreign entities were coordinating with American political figures to oppose federal policy, that raised serious legal questions. The Logan Act prohibits unauthorized citizens from negotiating with foreign governments. The Foreign Agents Registration Act requires disclosure of foreign influence activities. Campaign finance laws prohibit foreign contributions to political causes. Were these laws being violated? Evidence suggested they might be, but prosecuting the United Nations presented challenges: diplomatic immunity, international treaties, jurisdictional complexities. Federal prosecutors needed airtight evidence. By October 2025, they had it. Surveillance captured a meeting at UN headquarters, November 3, 2025. A senior UN official met with representatives from 6 American activist organizations. The discussion was recorded. The official outlined $8.3 million in emergency funding available for rapid response capabilities. He discussed legal support networks for challenging federal immigration enforcement. He mentioned media partnerships to amplify opposition narratives. One participant asked about legal risks. The official responded, "Structures provide insulation. Funding flows through established channels. Documentation shows humanitarian purposes. Legal exposure is minimal." They were discussing how to hide foreign coordination. Federal prosecutors had enough. Indictments were prepared. But the target wasn't just UN officials protected by immunity. It was American citizens coordinating with foreign entities without proper disclosure. 17 individuals were charged in December 2025. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Violations of foreign agent registration requirements. Tax fraud for unreported foreign income. Money laundering for disguised transactions. But the charges didn't stop there. If this shocks you, comment truth below. The sealed warrants executed January 6, 2026, targeted documents, not people. Federal agents weren't arresting UN diplomats. They were seizing evidence. Over 40 locations hit simultaneously: UN offices, NGO headquarters, foundation offices, private residences of American coordinators. Agents collected computers, servers, documents, financial records. The scope was unprecedented. UN officials protested immediately. They claimed diplomatic immunity extended to their offices. They argued international law prohibited such searches. They demanded federal agents leave immediately. Federal prosecutors were prepared. They presented court orders signed by federal judges. They cited evidence of criminal coordination involving American citizens. They noted diplomatic immunity doesn't cover criminal enterprises. The searches continued. Agents worked through the day. They imaged hard drives, photographed documents, cataloged financial records. By evening, they had removed over 60,000 files, 300 boxes of documents, 18 servers, 47 computers. The evidence filled 2 trucks. Initial analysis began immediately. Forensic teams worked in shifts. What they found exceeded expectations. Communications showing UN officials coordinating messaging with American media organizations. Financial records documenting unreported payments to American political consultants. Strategic plans for grassroots campaigns funded entirely by foreign money. One document outlined a narrative framework for American media. Talking points, story angles, expert sources, all provided by UN communications offices, all designed to influence American public opinion. Another detailed legal pressure campaigns targeting conservative policies, model legislation, litigation strategies, funding for coordinating law firms, all orchestrated through UN-affiliated organizations. The coordination was comprehensive. Environmental groups received UN funding and messaging guidance. Immigration advocates received legal support and media training. Social justice organizations received strategic planning and operational funding. Every network served the same purpose: influence American policy toward UN priorities. But the most damaging evidence came from internal assessments. UN officials documented their own success. Reports showed how funded organizations influenced state legislation. Tracking showed which media campaigns moved public opinion. Analysis demonstrated which legal challenges delayed policy implementation. They were measuring their impact on American governance. One report celebrated blocking federal immigration enforcement in 12 jurisdictions. Another highlighted media coverage that reframed border security as humanitarian crisis. A third analyzed how coordinated legal challenges delayed energy projects for an average of 18 months. These weren't observations. They were achievements. The UN was actively working to obstruct American policy. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The revelations triggered immediate political response. Congressional leaders demanded hearings. Oversight committees issued subpoenas. Lawmakers from both parties expressed outrage at foreign interference in domestic affairs. But the response wasn't unified. Some defended the UN. They argued the programs were legitimate humanitarian work. They claimed the investigations were politically motivated. They accused federal agents of overreach. Others called for accountability. They demanded prosecution of Americans who coordinated with foreign entities. They proposed legislation restricting UN activities in the United States. They suggested reducing American funding to UN programs. The divide was predictable, but the evidence was clear. Federal prosecutors released portions of seized documents, communications showing coordination, financial records proving unreported payments, strategic plans demonstrating political objectives. Public opinion shifted rapidly. Polls showed 68% of Americans believed the UN had overstepped its role. 71% supported investigating foreign influence in domestic politics. 64% favored restrictions on UN activities within the United States. But support divided along political lines. The issue became partisan immediately. Progressive organizations defended the UN. They argued the programs promoted human rights and democratic values. They claimed investigations targeted legitimate advocacy. They accused the administration of attacking international cooperation. Conservative groups demanded action. They argued foreign entities had no right to influence American policy. They claimed the coordination violated American sovereignty. They accused political opponents of collaborating with foreign powers. The debate raged through January 2026. But federal investigators kept working. Additional evidence emerged daily. More communications, more financial records, more coordination between UN officials and American political operatives. Agents identified a network of liaison officers embedded within American organizations, ostensibly consultants or advisors, actually UN representatives coordinating activities and ensuring compliance with international objectives. These individuals received salaries from UN-affiliated organizations. They attended strategy meetings. They provided guidance on messaging and tactics. They reported back to UN headquarters on progress and obstacles. 17 such positions were identified. Funding totaled $4.3 million annually. None were registered as foreign agents. None disclosed their coordination role. None reported their foreign income properly. Federal prosecutors added charges, more indictments, more evidence. The network was larger than initially suspected. Comment sovereignty if you believe nations should govern themselves. The international response was fierce. UN Secretary General issued a statement condemning the investigations as assault on multilateralism. European leaders expressed concern about unilateral actions against international organizations. Progressive governments worldwide criticized American retreat from global cooperation. But other nations quietly supported the investigations. Nations concerned about UN overreach. Countries frustrated with unelected bureaucrats imposing policies. Governments tired of international organizations exceeding their mandates. The divide wasn't just American, it was global. The fundamental question was authority. Who governs nations? Elected officials accountable to citizens, or international bureaucrats accountable to no one? The UN was founded to facilitate cooperation, prevent wars, promote peace, noble purposes, essential functions. But it had evolved beyond those purposes. UN agencies now promoted specific policy agendas, social engineering, economic redistribution, political ideology, not through democratic processes, through bureaucratic coordination and financial influence. The American investigation exposed what many suspected. The UN had become a political actor, not a neutral forum, not an impartial mediator. An organization with objectives and strategies to achieve them. That transformation raised profound questions. Should unelected international officials influence national policy? Should foreign money fund domestic political activities? Should international organizations coordinate with political factions against elected governments? Federal investigators answered clearly, no. American law prohibits foreign interference in domestic politics. International organizations aren't exempt. Diplomatic immunity doesn't cover criminal conspiracy. The rule of law applies to everyone. Prosecutions moved forward. By late January 2026, 12 Americans had been convicted on plea agreements. They admitted coordinating with foreign entities without proper registration. They acknowledged receiving foreign money without disclosure. They confessed to concealing the true sources of campaign funding. Sentences ranged from probation to 4 years imprisonment. Fines totaled $8.7 million. Assets were seized. Organizations were dissolved. But the legal consequences were only part of the impact. Share this video so the truth spreads further. The investigations damaged the UN's credibility in America. Polls showed trust in international organizations dropping to historic lows. Support for UN funding declined sharply. Congressional proposals to reduce American contributions gained momentum. The UN faced a crisis, not just in America, globally. If the largest contributor lost faith, other nations would follow. If American funding decreased, UN programs would contract. If credibility eroded, influence would vanish. UN officials scrambled to respond. They announced internal reforms, enhanced transparency, stricter oversight of affiliated organizations, new policies restricting political activities. But skeptics questioned whether reforms would matter. The problem wasn't just policy, it was culture, an institutional belief that international bureaucrats knew better than national electorates. That belief pervaded UN agencies. It shaped programs. It drove initiatives. It justified circumventing democratic processes. Changing that culture would require more than policy adjustments. It would require fundamental rethinking of the UN's role. Meanwhile, the legal process continued. Federal prosecutors pursued additional charges. 5 UN-affiliated organizations lost their tax-exempt status for political activities. 3 American foundations faced civil penalties for failing to disclose foreign funding sources. 17 individuals awaited trial on conspiracy charges. The cases would take years to resolve. Appeals would follow convictions. Legal battles would drag through courts, but the precedent was set. Foreign entities cannot coordinate domestic political activities. Americans cannot serve foreign interests without disclosure. International organizations must respect national sovereignty. Those principles seemed obvious. But they had been eroded gradually. Bureaucratic coordination, financial influence, institutional capture. The investigations reminded everyone that laws still applied. If you believe accountability matters, comment justice below. The political implications extended beyond legal cases. The revelations influenced American policy toward international organizations. Skepticism increased. Scrutiny intensified. Demands for accountability multiplied. Congress introduced legislation requiring annual audits of American contributions to international organizations. Proposals mandated transparency regarding how American money was spent. Bills required international organizations operating in America to register as foreign agents if they engaged in political activities. Some measures passed, others stalled, but the direction was clear. The era of uncritical support for international institutions was ending. American foreign policy shifted. Less emphasis on multilateral cooperation, more focus on national interest, reduced deference to international frameworks, greater willingness to challenge global consensus. Critics called it isolationism. Supporters called it sovereignty. The debate would continue for years. But the FBI investigation had changed the conversation fundamentally. International organizations weren't beyond scrutiny. Global governance wasn't inevitable. National sovereignty still mattered. Those principles resonated with millions of Americans tired of being told that unelected bureaucrats knew best, frustrated with policies imposed without consent, angry about foreign interference in domestic affairs. The investigations validated their concerns. The evidence proved their suspicions. The prosecutions demonstrated that accountability was possible. But the fight wasn't finished. Because the network still existed, the funding streams still flowed, the coordination still continued in modified forms. International organizations adjusted tactics. They became more careful, more subtle, more deniable. But the fundamental objectives remained: influence national policy, promote global agendas, bypass democratic processes when necessary. Federal investigators continued monitoring, building cases, preparing prosecutions. The January 2026 raids weren't the end. They were the beginning. Hit like if you stand for American sovereignty. The American people faced a choice: accept international influence as inevitable, or demand that elected officials govern without foreign interference. The FBI investigation provided information, evidence, facts. But citizens had to decide what those facts meant. Some saw legitimate humanitarian work unfairly targeted. Others saw foreign subversion finally exposed. The interpretation depended on fundamental beliefs about sovereignty, governance, and democracy. But certain facts were undeniable. Foreign money had funded domestic political activities. International organizations had coordinated with American political factions. UN officials had developed strategies to influence American policy. Whether that constituted legitimate advocacy or illegal interference remained debatable legally. But morally, the answer seemed clear. Nations must govern themselves. Citizens must control their own policies. Democracy requires that elected officials answer to voters, not international bureaucrats. Those principles built America. They guided the republic for centuries. They couldn't be surrendered to global governance without destroying what made America unique. The UN investigations reminded Americans of those principles. They exposed how easily sovereignty could be eroded, how foreign influence could penetrate institutions, how coordination could bypass democratic processes. The lessons were valuable. Vigilance matters. Transparency matters. Accountability matters. International cooperation should enhance national interests, not replace them. Global organizations should facilitate dialogue, not dictate policy. Multilateralism should complement sovereignty, not contradict it. Finding that balance would define international relations for decades. The investigations exposed one network, but how many others existed? How many foreign entities influenced American policy? How many Americans coordinated with foreign powers without disclosure? Federal investigators were searching for answers. Building cases, following evidence. More investigations would come, more raids would happen, more prosecutions would follow, because the American government had decided that sovereignty wasn't negotiable. Democratic processes weren't optional. Foreign interference wouldn't be tolerated. That message needed to reach every international organization, every foreign entity, every American tempted to serve foreign interests above national law. The fortress of unaccountable global governance was cracking. The empire of international bureaucracy was faltering. The era of unlimited foreign influence was ending. Share this before it disappears from the internet. The UN investigations represented more than legal cases. They represented a philosophical shift. For decades, globalization seemed inevitable. International organizations appeared permanent. Global governance looked unstoppable, but the American people were pushing back. Not against cooperation, not against diplomacy, against the arrogant assumption that unelected bureaucrats should govern nations. That pushback would reshape international institutions. It would redefine America's role in global affairs. It would rebalance power between national governments and international organizations. The process would be messy, controversial, divisive, but necessary. Because democracy cannot survive if foreign entities control domestic policy. Sovereignty cannot endure if international bureaucrats override elected officials. Freedom cannot persist if unaccountable organizations impose their will on nations. The FBI investigation exposed the threat. The prosecutions demonstrated accountability was possible. The reforms showed that change could happen. But lasting change required citizen engagement, voters demanding transparency, taxpayers questioning foreign aid, Americans insisting their government serve American interests. That engagement was growing. The investigations catalyzed awareness. The evidence shocked millions. The prosecutions proved the system still worked. Comment America if you believe sovereignty matters. The January 6, 2026 raids changed everything. They exposed coordination. They revealed networks. They demonstrated foreign interference in American affairs. The UN would never operate the same way again. Not in America, not without scrutiny, not without accountability. International organizations faced a choice. Reform genuinely, respect sovereignty, operate transparently, or face continued investigations and declining support. The American government had sent a message. Foreign interference would be prosecuted, coordination would be exposed, influence operations would be dismantled. That message resonated globally. Other nations watched. Some would follow America's example. Others would defend international organizations. The debate would shape geopolitics for decades. But in America, the direction was clear. Sovereignty first, democracy protected, foreign influence restricted. The investigations would continue, the prosecutions would proceed, the reforms would advance, because the American people had decided that their government should answer to them, not to international bureaucrats, not to global organizations, not to foreign entities. That decision would define America's future. It would shape international relations. It would determine whether democracy or global governance prevailed. The fortress of unaccountable international power had been breached. The empire of global bureaucracy was exposed. The network of foreign influence was unraveling. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Subscribe so you see what happens next. Share this so others learn the truth. Comment your thoughts below. The raid happened at 4:47 a.m. January 6, 2026. But the consequences will last for years. The evidence will fuel debates for decades. The precedent will shape policy forever. The UN thought it could operate above national law. It thought diplomatic immunity was absolute. It thought American sovereignty was negotiable. It was wrong, and the investigations proved it. The prosecutions confirmed it. The American people demanded it. Sovereignty isn't optional. Democracy isn't negotiable. Foreign interference won't be tolerated. That message echoed through Manhattan that cold January morning. It spread across America through the month. It reached international organizations worldwide. The era of unchallenged global governance is over. The age of accountability has begun, and it started with 80 federal agents executing search warrants at the United Nations headquarters while New York City slept. The fortress fell. The truth emerged. Justice began. This is only the beginning.